Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar discussion video. This is going to be a discussion about the special bending techniques, the advanced bending techniques, basically every style of bending that isn't just your standard earth, water, fire, air bending. I'm going to discuss all that stuff that relates to them and so on. It's going to be a bit more of a sort of speculation type video, just sort of talking, discussing about it. There's not a lot I can do here to just sort of present the information too clearly, because I think everyone is familiar with, like, this technique exists, but trying to sort of like piece the whole sort of structure of things together. How does this work? History of these techniques. That's a little less clear. So that's what I'm going to be discussing today. This is a Patreon chosen topic. This was chosen by one of my new patrons, Joel. Specifically what he asked for initially was my thoughts on some questions that he had, which was initially about the idea of, like, wait, what about the theory that potentially Hama was not actually the first person ever in history to invent or use bloodbending, but what if, like the way lightning generation is presented in the Kyoshi novels, it was sort of a thing that has happened in the past, like thousands of years ago. Maybe some waterbender discovered during the full moon you could do bloodbending, but never told anyone. It just kind of came and went. And it was only with Hama and passing it on to Katara and then what happened from there that it actually became a more public thing in the world. And I suppose that's what we're going to be talking about to a degree with these abilities, is just how they go from sort of not existing to suddenly existing, and then suddenly a bunch of people can use them in certain cases, but they're still very rare abilities. So to directly answer those two questions, I said that, you know, like, that might not be enough for a full video. So let's just expand that topic into everything special bending techniques, and he was happy with that. So directly answering the question, I think it's definitely possible that Hama wasn't maybe the exact, like, first person ever in the history of the world to invent bloodbending. That, yeah, maybe like is presented with lightning, it is more of a thing where it was a rumor at some point, but it went away. That's just this legendary thing that very few people in the world know about nowadays, that, like, you know, the people controlling each other like puppets with during the full moons. It's a tough one, because when they tell the story about, like, this character invented the technique, you sort of have to take it as being pretty literal, in that, say, Metalbending and Toph, I don't think they're ever going to tell a story where someone before Toph can metal bend. I think that would take away from her discovery. Even if they make it sort of clear that it was thousands of years in the past, the technique was completely forgotten over time, and Toph is the first person in thousands of years to discover the technique, it still would take a little bit away from the fact that Toph, it fits that she is the one to discover the technique, in the same way that it ultimately fits that Hama, imprisoned, water kept away from her, finds a way to get out of prison, a unique situation, by bending the people around her. The overall point I would like to make as well that I'm going to sort of bring up as a sort of theory on this, is sort of, why are there all these special bending techniques, like especially Lavabending and Combustion Bending and Psychic Bloodbending, especially those three techniques, which are like bloodline abilities seemingly that very few people are born with, and they're likely not going to become super prevalent in the world. Why is that sort of happening? And I think there is this sense of, like, is bending, like, evolving over time? Like, not just in the sense of, like, technique and stuff like that, but, like, literally people as they are born, their bodies are evolving. The fact that it's been, like, 10,000 years, or in some of these cases, like 9,000 and a bit years, since humans have had bending. Of course, the way that sort of power of the element being in their body interacts with their chi path and their body itself is going to sort of evolve a little bit over time when you have that much time pass, like 10,000 years, a long time. So it makes sense that coming towards the end of, like, a 10,000 year period, you're going to have these kind of unique benders born where stuff is just a little bit haywire with them and they're, like, crazy powerful. And I think that very much fits, and it's why Sokka's, like, what he says at Yukon's trial about, you know, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense based on the sort of rules we know right now about how bloodbending works, in my experiences, I have encountered a variety of like unique and powerful benders over the years. I think we just have to add another one to the list. This idea that you can bloodbend, certain people can bloodbend without the full moon, is just another special ability of bending. That there is this sense of just people will be born with a unique approach to an element over time. And that's why I think it's very difficult to fully like categorize all of this stuff into like, oh, each element has one bloodline ability, one advanced technique, one spiritual technique, and one other technique. When I think they've left themselves, in terms of the writing department, in terms of the power level of bending, very much open with the idea that there is a lot that they could do in terms of, if they really want to go big, they always have that capacity to introduce a new technique because of what they've already done before. And I think that's what we have to kind of like talk about here, that's going to be a big thing as we go forward. In the case of like Hama and Bloodbending, the situation I think fits that waterbenders get more powerful when the full moon is out. And so that gives them the capacity, especially if they're a talented waterbender, it gives them the capacity to either do big scale waterbending or high precision waterbending. Bloodbending, of course, is a very high precision technique. It is all about having utter control over the like tiny bits of water that are basically part of a person's body. In that it's not just like a stream of water throughout someone's body, but like just targeting those like micro bits of water throughout the body and just controlling it as a whole. That requires a ton of power, but power in a control sense. You have to have the ability to sort of sense that all the water is there, where it is, what you want to do with it, but then the power to actually execute on that. And without the full moon, the idea is realistically that no waterbender is powerful enough to execute that technique properly. That I think theoretically it's one of those things where if a powerful waterbender without the full moon decided like, oh, let me try and target the water just within someone's hand, they could probably make them twitch or something like that. But if the person who they were trying to do it on was aware of it like at all, they would just be able to immediately break through, close their hand, or do whatever they need to do. The idea is that the full moon amplifies a waterbender's ability so much that their bloodbending grip outweighs like another waterbender's ability to control it, or just a person's ability to control their own body. And I think that just comes down to that sort of battle of like sort of chi in a way, that if empowered by the full moon, a waterbender's chi is only going to be outmatched by another more powerful waterbender's like chi and their energy, which is basically what happens with Katara and Hama. And so you take that then to psychic bloodbending, Yakone's family, and the ability to bloodbend without the full moon. And what is the core ability that this family has access to? I don't think the ability that they have access to is necessarily just that they are just specifically have this bloodbending ability. I think the idea is more that family is born naturally super powerful as waterbenders, and so do not need the power of the full moon because they already have that power level just by default. That whatever was happened to them in terms of whatever physically is different about them to make them have this ability, it gives them the raw power from the get-go to just be able to do bloodbending on the power and scale precision required to do it. And I think that comes across somewhat clearly with how powerful they are just with regards to normal waterbending. Now, we don't have too many examples, unfortunately, of like the pure, at its maximum power, just normal waterbending of Yakone, Tarrlok, or Amon. Because I assume Tarrlok, when he does waterbend, probably does hold back a little bit, just to not demonstrate that, like, I am the most powerful waterbender in the entire world. But when he does sort of go out a little bit against like Korra, the water machine gun move that he does seems like really, really powerful. That he's able to keep that going. And Korra has just done a few attacks, and she sort of has to like pause. That like she can't keep it going up against such a barrage, and the only thing she can think to do is just completely earthbend him out of that situation to stop him from doing that. And then he's forced to bloodbend her after that. And then Amon, the one time we see him do normal water bending, is a pretty powerful water spout that feels like an avatar in the avatar state would be relatively happy with that type thing. It's maybe not that level, but it's getting more towards that level versus like I think what we've seen waterbenders do like without it, in that Amon's water spout feels like, yeah, like that would be the equivalent of a like moon powered one. So like that, treated as basically being the Yacone family, as if like the moon is just sort of permanently turned on for them in terms of both just their raw power level normally and that at least that's my impression, because otherwise then it gets kind of weird into like, you know, the ability of bloodbending is just water bending focused on a person's body. So how does their ability only apply to doing that thing specifically and not anything else? And that's the point that I'm trying to make here about most of these techniques, is that it ultimately stems into the idea that it is, all of these techniques are possible through just being powerful enough to be precise enough and control it enough. And that's the way to explain pretty much all of these techniques. So we'll move into lightning generation and what Joel was talking about in his question here. So there's 2 points in the book very close together where they talk about lightning generation during this era. So Jianju finds about Zhu Ping-an's jailbreak. Zhu Ping-an, of course, is the lightning bender that Kyoshi duels and ends up killing. But this is what it says. Against every inclination, Jianju had kept the leader of the Yellow Necks alive as a favor to his Fire Nation allies, so they could study how the man was capable of bending lightning. It was a skill so rare that some thought it a folktale or a secret that had been lost to the ages. Either way, it made Zhu a valuable, dangerous specimen. And Tay, who owned one of the most defensible prisons in the region, had managed to let him escape. So there's our first one, just getting across immediately that idea that most people consider it a folktale or something that was maybe around a little bit in the past but sort of was forgotten then over time, implying this idea that there were lightning benders in the past, but it was maybe only one guy who sort of learned the technique and then didn't pass it on, couldn't find anyone to pass it on to, or didn't want to, and so the secret of his ability died with him. No one was able to analyze what he was doing and continue the training of that technique onwards. Then later they ask Rangi about it as like a firebender, like, did you know people could do this? And she says, no. Bending lightning is a skill so rare there are barely any living witnesses who confirm it exists. And the reports don't mention Zhu was from the Fire Nation at all. So, yeah, she's, from her perspective as a noble in the Fire Nation, it is considered a skill so rare that barely anyone who is aware that the technique exists. So it speaks to this idea that in this era, lightning generation is not part of the royal family lineage. But in the era between Kyoshi and I suppose getting towards like Sozin Azula and Ozai, it does become a thing as part of the royal family. So perhaps from studying Zhu, or some lightning bender who pops up afterwards, they do manage to incorporate that into the Fire Nation royal lineage and then keep it there seemingly until we get to Korra's era where a few more people know it. So most notably, Lightning Bolt Zolt learns the technique somewhere along the line. He teaches it to Mako. And then also there's a few other people who work in the electricity factory with the power plant with electricity factory. It's just a simplistic way of saying it. But yeah, the power plant. There's like, I think it's 4 or 5 other lightning benders there. So when people say like, oh, they made lightning generation much more like widespread than it once was, it's like, okay, it went from being like, how many people in ATLA? 3? Like Ozai, Iroh, and Azula had the technique. And then in Korra, who has the technique? It's Iroh can use it, General Iroh in this case. Mako can do it. Lightning Bolt Zolt can do it. And then 4 or 5 power plant workers. Like, you jump up from like 3, 4 to like 8, so it doubles in like 70 years. I don't think that's too much. It's still a rare technique that requires you to be thoughted by someone skilled enough to know how it works, because I think the main limiting factor for lightning generation is just that it is a technical technique, that it's not just some like enhanced version of firebending or like some precision version of firebending. It's very much of almost all of the bending techniques, the one that feels the most different than anything. Even combustion bending, as much as it's kind of explosion based, is sort of like contained fire that when it hits explodes. You can get where that comes from, but the idea of like it's lightning. It's not fire, it's lightning. It's just so different, and especially the way it's explained of like you separate positive and negative energies and then you crash them back together, and that difference in energy is what creates lightning. Just normal firebending training based on like the breath and the philosophy of like viewing it as like life, or it being more of a destructive thing as most of the Fire Lords would view it. It seems like a very, very different thing. And so that's, I think, probably what is the ultimate limiting thing on that side of things, is just you do need a teacher for that. Like, it's why would you ever think as a firebender to like try and sort of like pull energy like apart? Like, who even knew you could do that necessarily? So it speaks to that idea of, I think in a lot of cases these techniques have to be invented by someone exceptionally powerful who has the ability to do very unique things that no other standard bender can do. But then once the technique of how it's done is discovered, the ability is opened up to so many more people, because there's not really a trial and error anymore. This is how you do it. You're either powerful enough to pull it off or not. And I think that's what's so significant like about it here, in that they clearly get across the idea that like Zu realistically was this sort of special firebender who was born, happened to, learn about this technique that he had, and then was studied, and that potentially is where people know about it from now. Toph for metal bending is the other main example of that, in that I think this is why, especially with Toph, it makes a ton of sense why she was the first person ever to learn it, because it's the combination of factors that came into play for her to learn it. One, the fact that she is blind helps her in this regard, because it means it forces her to have a deeper connection to Earth. Secondly, she was trained by the Badger Mole, so that you double that connection almost just because of that. She's learned in the proper, original way of Earthbending, and that can't be underestimated. 3, Toph is exceptionally powerful. She is one of, if not the most powerful Earthbenders we've ever seen in the series. And those like 3 factors together have to align in the situation she's in when she's in the metal box, captured by Xinfu and Master Yu, for her to realize that if I'm getting myself out of this, I have to bend this metal. And especially with, of course, the way they do that scene, as the Guru explains to Aang the idea that metal is just earth that's been like refined, basically. There's still bits of impurities in it, and you can bend it if you do that. It's very fitting, because it speaks to, like I said before, most of these abilities are just using power and precision to bend like a trace amount of your element, or do something like that. Have exceptional control over a small amount of your element. That's what bloodbending is, and that's what metalbending is. It's bending a sheet of metal based on a couple of like scattered like impurities throughout the metal. And of course that requires precision to be able to see that they're there in the first place, and then it requires the power to be able to bend the entire sheet just by, bending like a few little pieces inside of it, and that's the core of the technique. And I think that's why when you get to Korra and you get to Su Yin, and she's basically like to Bolin, as far as I'm concerned, anyone, any earthbender, if they try hard enough, if they put the time in, can learn metal bending. She doesn't agree with the odds that Bolin says, like whatever it is. 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000 earthbenders can do metal bending. That might be for like the talented people, in terms of like the people who are very obvious of like, yeah, this guy's a super talented earthbender. Within a few days I can get him metal bending. But from Sue's point of view, she's kind of like, if someone trains as hard as possible with the aim of becoming a metal bender, it will happen as far as I'm concerned. That's very interesting to me, and I think you have to view a lot of techniques in the Avatar world in that way, that as soon as the knowledge of how they're performed comes out, and especially when you get to Korra and you have the training methods of like the meteorite material being the easiest metal for a metal bender to bend. That's how Toph found her first students, and it's what Su uses to teach Korra how to metal bend as well. That it's a very easy one to manipulate, and then you move up from there. That the training technique went from one of the most powerful benders in the Avatar universe discovering it in this crazy moment to get out, to no, we have methods now to teach it to you, in the same way that we have methods to teach standard earthbending, waterbending, and so on. And I think that's very interesting to consider, and I suppose it's the same for lightning generation, just that it still seems to be a little bit more secret on that side of things. It makes you wonder, like, is there a lineage of like lightning bending training in terms of like where did Lightning Bolt Zolt learn from, and so on. But anyway, so from there, I suppose we'll jump into the bloodline abilities. I think I pretty much already covered psychic bloodbending and so on. The final point I'll make on that is just that note the difference between Noatok and Tarrlok. Noatok, like his father Yukon, is able to do the psychic version of the technique, where he doesn't need to use his hands, he can just like look at you and think about what he wants to do, and it happens. Tarrlok has to use his hands when he does it, so he's a little bit weaker than those two, and it's not particularly clear if that is just down to his personality, of him being not as strong-willed as the other two, or if just naturally he is just not as powerful. He still has the core sort of mutation or evolution, whatever way you want to call it, that allows him to perform the core ability of just not needing the moon to bloodbend. But to take it to the degree where you have so much control, you can just do it with your mind, that's a step too far. So let's go to Lavabending. Lavabending is an interesting one because it all comes together fairly nicely when you view it as just like Bolin and Ghazan, but then when you try to account for the fact that like 2 avatars have been shown to lava bend, it kind of gets a little bit confusing, because Avatar Zito lava bends, Avatar Kyoshi lava bends, but Avatar Roku wasn't able to lava bend during his big moment. And you're kind of questioning, like, why is that? Like, is that just a direct confirmation that Kyoshi and Zito were lava benders? Or is it something more about the avatar state, and that if an avatar develops lava bending, it is active within the avatar, it is active for like the few avatars around that avatar when they go into the avatar state, and that's maybe why Kyoshi was able to use lava bending, because Zito would be the sort of last avatar in the cycle before you go back more. Oh no, because Zito would be in the 4 avatars just before her, in the same way that like Aang has his group of 4 avatars before him that go from Roku to Yang Chen. Kyoshi has the avatars going from Karuk back to the Earth avatar before her, who may or may not be Avatar Salai, but we don't know anything about him. Either way, so, Zito is in that. So if Zito is a lava bender, potentially that meant that Yang Chen, Karuk, Kyoshi, and that doesn't work as well, because if you view it that way, then Roku should have had access to lava bending. So unless it's maybe some sort of a rule where like within 3 it works, but otherwise we don't know. I would say this is where I think that is another situation where it was something not fully thought out at that point. When they wrote those episodes, they were obviously thinking that like, oh, we'll show the fire avatar before Roku in this scene, because it's Roku explaining the avatar state, and we'll show him doing something really cool in the avatar state. And they thought that, oh, making a volcano explode is fire, isn't it? When they showed all of the other avatars using their actual element. Like Yang Chen made a giant gust of wind, Tarrlok made the water come up, and so on. Kyoshi moved those giant stone statues. Zito uses Lavabending, which is another earthbending technique, but it's because that only got confirmed much later on. Even when Kyoshi uses it, when she creates Kyoshi Island, we still, I suppose, theoretically at that point viewed it as being more of a firebending technique. And it was only when they got to Korra and they introduced like Gazan that they, and Bolin having the technique, that they properly like confirmed to us that it is a technique called Lavabending and it is used by earthbenders. So that's just a very weird one. As for the theory that Lavabenders require a like bit of Fire Nation lineage in their kind of history, I don't really buy into that much, for the sole reason of humans can only have the power of one element within their body unless you do the training that Wan went through to get it. And even then, Wan was still limited at that time to 1 until harmonic convergence. But that's not really the point. I think when you try to make the case that like it requires this dual lineage to create this ability, it presents too much of this weird idea that you can have 2 elements mixed together, which gets a little bit too much into Avatar territory and kind of promotes the idea that, oh, there's going to be a mixed ability for every single combination of elements. So like there's going to be an air-water technique, and we're getting into like Naruto Kekkei Genkai territory, which I don't think they're trying to do in this case. So I really do associate it as just being the equivalent of psychic bloodbending for Earth, where some people are born naturally with this sort of bigger capacity to do big earthbending. Like I said, they have more power in terms of like scale, but they also have more power in terms of precision. And when it comes to lava, the way to view it again is that like it's different than metal. With metal, you can understand the logic of like, you understand how it's made. It is refined like earth, rock, and there's still impurities left in it, so that can be bent. The thing is, like, how do you view this sort of like flowing fluid earth that's like hot and not particularly solid in the element that's all about, you know, stability and stuff like that? It's like, I'm not a waterbender, how can I even control it? It's not fluid, it's not stable. And so I think that's the way to view it, of like, it's all just like this one mesh of like liquid earth, basically. So how do you control it? What do you target? And I think there's that sense of like, this is taking that precision of earthbending to like the next level. You have, oh, I can target big rocks, pebbles and stuff like that, but can I target like microscopic bits of earth in metal? And then can I target like just the idea that lava is earth, just in a different form? And that most earthbenders can't, because they're so used to what they can usually do with their element. And again, it gets into a little bit of the sort of bloodbending idea of like, what do you target? Like, do you just target like one of the limbs or about all the limbs to try and do it? You have to have the power to target everything. And I think it's the same here. You have to have the ability to target this whole however amount of lava you want to and control it at will, which I think leans a little bit into what we learn about Yoon in the Shadow of Kyoshi, and post consuming Glowworm. He is incredibly powerful to the point where he's able to take on like Kyoshi, Rangi, Kirima, Wong, and Jinpa all at once and beat them all. And the things he's doing with Earth, like he can liquefy Earth, he can solidify it straight away. When he gets into a proper earthbending stance, he basically has full control over the ground and earth around him over a wide area, and can just basically make the earth vibrate and turn it into waves, do whatever he wants. It's insane how powerful Yoon actually is. But they clarify that like liquefying Earth is this crazy demonstration of control, as well as the fact that he does stuff like salt bending and the ability to get the trace amounts of Earth out of paint in paintings on the walls and use that as Earthbending. That's power through precision coming into play, 100%. But also, like I said, you need the power to back that up. Unless you're super powerful, you're not going to be able to liquefy a giant block of stone, warp it around someone's body, and then solidify it again as like a perfect prison, which we never really see anyone do. But and I suppose it speaks to like it is that perfect prison. We typically see people make the kind of slabs of like a rock come up around them, like to their neck, maybe to create a prison for them. But you know, you can still move a little bit. This is just a perfect like encasing of Earth. So you can see the value of something like liquefying stone, but it is still just, you know, solid stone, just taken apart so finely that it's almost like he's like sand bending like a whole, you know, boulder or something like that, and has complete control over it like that. And I think that's the way to view lava bending, just on an even more complicated form, because it's like heated and stuff like that, and there is that extra element of like, once you develop the ability of lava bending, you can cool it down to turn it back into normal Earth, but then you can also turn normal Earth into lava. And I think that's where people get the misinterpretation that there has to be some element of firebending involved in it, is just because the change of state requires heat. But you have to remember that water bending, just natural water bending, no special ability, has the ability to turn liquid water into ice and liquid water into steam or mist or whatever. And they don't talk about water bending as requiring any sort of firebender lineage. It's just that when you're a bender of that level, you can kind of do what you want with the element. I suppose it's one of those things where like I don't interpret it necessarily as a lava bender directly sort of like heats up or cools down their element. Just through earth bending, they change it into that form. And it sort of has the effect of sort of creating or like taking away heat, but that's just the way the thing works, basically. Because otherwise you're getting into such complicated dynamics of like, you know, well, shouldn't there be heat involved in airbending as well to create like pressure and make air move in that way? When it's like, no. It's based on controlling your own chi and interacting with it, and it is like a magic system. So yeah, that's lava bending. It's an interesting one. Like Bolin obviously has the firebending lineage, which I think is where people get a lot of the speculation that is the case from. But then that doesn't really explain, like, then why doesn't Mako have some sort of like fire ability that relates to earth? Because they're not trying to do that in my mind, at the very least. Gazan is interesting. Like, we don't know anything if he has a connection to firebending whatsoever, where he's from in the Earth Kingdom and so on, but just that he's a lava bender. You maybe wonder who taught him to lava bend, but he's part of the Red Lotus, and they might have information on previous lava benders and were able to teach him. It's hard to speculate about unless we got his backstory. And yeah, like I said, the issue with the avatars in lava bending, I think, is just, it's a error of early Avatar, like the good amount that there are. I think that's more of the case than anything, because it's very hard to reconcile how Zito and Kyoshi can lava bend, but Roku can't, and dies basically because he didn't have access to that ability. But anyway, Combustion Bending. So this is our fire bending bloodline ability. Only 2 characters are known to have had it, Pali and Combustion Man. Now what's interesting about this is basically the similarity between the 2 users. There's 70 years of gap between these 2 characters, but they're surprisingly similar. One, they're both exceptionally tall people. They both have a tattoo on their forehead, which they seem to both be aware of enhances their ability to control their chi to target their combustion bending. And obviously they're both, you know, from the Fire Nation, from sort of mysterious origins in some way. We don't know a lot about Combustion Man's backstory outside of the fact that like he blew off one of his arms, one of his legs, and then participated in a bunch of Agni Kais, which he won, of course, because of Combustion Bending, and is an assassin at the point at which Zuko hires him. Outside of that, I don't think we know anything else. Pali, the only thing we learn about her backstory is that she was held captive by a warlord, which you can speculate is theoretically from one of the Fire Islands, which maybe highlights that Pali grew up on one of the outer Fire Islands, so more isolated from the capital, and it might speak to the idea that like Combustion Man and Pali are both maybe from the same island, so whatever island that they're from has maybe a combustion bending heritage to a degree to it. Because we don't have any sense of like combustion bending throughout the years outside of the two characters that we have. But, you know, I think just the fact that they both have tattoos and knew to put them there, it speaks to who thought them to do that. Like, especially Combustion Man. It doesn't seem like the sharpest tool in the shed. Why would he think to do that specifically? Pali, you get a better sense because joining the Red Lotus, they'd have some information potentially to help her harness her ability better. That sort of fits. But there's something inherent to maybe where they're from, where the people there know what to do with regards to that third eye tattoo. Now, as for speculation on how this ability works, I think one of the interesting things, and I don't think I've actually mentioned this in any of the videos, it just occurred to me quite recently, is why does combustion bending have to be shot out of the forehead? Like, we get the idea. The tattoo, you fire out of the forehead, that's where the explosions come from. It's psychic firebending. Why can't they, though, fire it out of their hands or legs? Like, that's my thing. It's just like, if you can do normal firebending and do all these normal moves, like Pali can, typical firebending kicks, punches, blocks, and stuff like that, why can't you just create the combustion blast coming out of your hand and just like throw it forward like that or with a punch, just to have a little bit extra control or something like that? Why does it have to come out of your forehead? Because like that doesn't seem to be a limitation the other abilities have. Like, you don't have to control lava bending with a specific part of your body or anything like that, but you do with combustion bending, and every example shows it as being that way. And I'm not entirely sure why. I don't know, maybe it's just a case of like, it's because the core ability, I suppose, it's sort of like creating like a giant fire blast and just containing it in what seems to be like a kind of coating of air almost, which is the way they show it. It's like this sort of concussion type thing that goes through the air. And then when it hits something, it like explodes, like you're firing bombs. But I think the idea is that I guess you have to use your head. You have to psychically firebend the kind of coating around the blast, and that's how it works. I'm not sure. Like, maybe it is a case of like this is just one of the rarest abilities that it always manifests itself first by firing out of your head, that you never think to do it anywhere else. But it's just an interesting thing I just thought of, that like, yeah, it's awfully specific there. But that also brings up the idea of like, you know, how you defeat a combustion bender is often, you know, block their chi up here, causing their blast to backfire and kill themselves. There's a chakra point in your forehead as well. So we've talked about how, you know, the idea of like the elements and the chakras, and the idea that like, okay, look, there's 4 chakras, one for each element. There's a fire chakra, an earth chakra, water chakra, air chakra. All throughout the body, and we know the locations of them from the Guru episode. So that seems to sort of be related to what specifies one bender is a bender of one element over the other. What if a combustion bender has not only like a more powerful fire chakra, but that fire energy, the power of fire that they got from the lion turtle and has gone through the generations, also has some effect on their insight chakra here in the forehead. And that's why there's that connection between their firepower plus the forehead. Again, it's hard to speculate on because like we don't really have evidence of like the chakra points for like the other chakra points, the crown of the forehead or the throat. It's the throat chakra. Yeah, it's the other one. The sound chakra. We don't have evidence of those ones, which is why some people have speculation that if airbending is ever going to get like a super rare bloodline ability, that it would be something like sound bending, and that it would relate to the throat, the chakra in the throat. And so it would be like basically sonic boom kind of airbending style stuff, which I think is absolutely possible, and I think fits the best. That you could potentially have that ability where airbenders make giant blasts out of their mouth that are kind of concussive in nature and can do stuff that is more sound based. That seems very reasonable and fitting, and would link in with combustion bending to a degree. You do then wonder, like, okay, we know the other chakra, the crown of the head one, is the one that relates to cosmic energy. That seems very specific to the avatar, but maybe there's a way to incorporate an ability from one of the other elements into that. Like there's some other water bending ability that relates to it. It's hard to properly speculate on that sort of stuff, though. So yeah, that's combustion bending. Like, it's one of those things where, like, obviously both of them are dead now. I assume at some point they could introduce another one. Probably won't be for a while, though. But that especially is one where, especially if you tell stories in the past, you can always introduce that as well. In that, like, okay, does it fit that the Fire Nation would have two abilities that they don't know about even as far back as Kyoshi? Like, it's just combustion bending non-existent until Combustion Man, or what? I don't actually mind that. I don't mind too much that there are a lot of these abilities that are just, their history is entirely much more recent. If Combustion Man literally is the first ever combustion bender, I wouldn't actually have too much of a problem with that. But I think there probably has to be at least one before him who maybe knew what the ability was, just to explain the tattoo situation or something like that. So there's that. Other abilities, waterbending healing is a weird one, because Jong, when it's in the episode where it's first introduced, notes that, like, Katara is sort of special because she has the ability to heal. But then when we get to the Northern Water Tribe, it seems to just be a kind of regular thing in the Water Tribe that girls who are waterbenders learn healing and not combat waterbending training, implying that it's not really a special ability necessarily that you have to be born with, that you're special if you have the ability to heal. My guess from Jong's point of view is probably that Katara, and roughly knowing the way the group went, is sort of significant in being able to sort of activate healing on her own without having any training, more than anything. And I think that's what more fits, because even through Ottawad in Shadow of Kyoshi, there doesn't seem to be an implication that you have to be particularly, like, hyper skilled or anything like that to be a healer, or anything like that. So once you, I suppose, have a reasonable control over your bending, you can be a waterbender healer, is the impression that I get. I don't think it's meant to be viewed as being a particularly, like, super special technique. At least that's my take on it. Ottawad's technique from Shadow of Kyoshi, though, they do specify requires power and precision. You need the power to be able to change the heat as much as you do. You need the precision to be able to control the heat well enough that you cool down a person's body, but don't turn them to ice, basically. Which is why Kyoshi then purposefully overpowers the technique to kill Yoon by freezing his heart and lungs instantly. That works out kind of pretty well, I think. So I don't think there's any need to go particularly in-depth on healing, especially when Kyoshi is revealed in the Shadow of Kyoshi to also know healing. And she learns most of it from a book and is able to heal but not have the glow happen, but it's still implied to heal. But then when she does train with Ottawad, she does learn the ability to make it glow and I suppose make it work properly and heal more serious injuries with it. So that's all fine, I guess. You just need more direct training because it's a more technical ability, is the way to view it. Other abilities. I suppose we're getting into the more spiritual ones at this point. So Unalaq's Spiritbending technique is an interesting one. Obviously, you need to be spiritual to use it, but you also need to know be somewhat technical to do it, because you obviously have to maintain a spiral of water around a spirit, and then be sort of composed enough with your spirituality to actually, you have to be peaceful yourself to pacify the spirit. Like, you have to have that control over yourself to make it happen. So that's one of those ones where, you know, I wouldn't say you need to be insanely powerful to do that technique, but you do need to be very, very spiritual to make it work. Otherwise, I think we see a lot of waterbenders attempting a technique like that, and not just someone super spiritual like Unalaq and Korra. We'll see going forward, potentially, if anyone else learns it. But that one's fine. I don't think there's too much of a limitation on that one at all. The Bhanti tribe have a spiritual firebending technique. We see the shaman healer do this fire hands thing across Korra, and she figures out that Korra's avatar spirit is in danger and that she needs to be put into the spirit water to reconnect to it. So in the Shadow of Kyoshi, Nyadha is revealed to be from the Bhanti tribe, and he also has this firebending spiritual technique, which they describe as being a diagnostic technique that helps to analyze what's going on with a person's energy and their spirit specifically, but also that the ability has at least some minor aspect of being able to heal a person's spirit. It doesn't seem to be particularly effective given how powerful like dark spirit corruption actually is, which is probably why the shaman healer couldn't specifically do that much to help Korra, other than just reconnect her to the past lives to get through it. It seems to just be like, if you get minorly like touched by a dark spirit, you can heal that off with the Bhanti tribe's technique. And again, it just, I think, requires more control over your firebending to obviously just have the energy going through, use the bending to get the sense going, but not have it be so hot that you burn someone. That's pretty cool. And yeah, beyond that, other spiritual techniques, I suppose Zahir and Gurlahima's flight technique is an interesting one in that it's spiritual to a degree, but it more relates to philosophy than anything, in that it seems to be the case where if you truly do properly, utterly separate yourself from everything in the world, you have no earthly tethers, no attachments to anything on the world, you can just fly. You can float for the rest of your life. The way they explain it to me gets across the idea that as much as that seems like, oh, that's achievable, for you to truly leave everything behind is much more difficult than you think. So that's my kind of explanation on the flight technique, is just that as much as that it seems accessible to a lot of people, not many people, even air nomads who are deep into their culture, are truly capable of just kind of almost like abandoning everything. Taking like the guru's advice to Aang to its absolute extremes of just having zero attachments whatsoever. Like, what sort of a person kind of do you have to be to just be attached to nothing, be perfectly free from the world? It's a unique ability, of course, but it's an interesting one where it's like it's partially spiritual, but it's mainly like your philosophy on it. It's hard to fully know where to place it in that. Is that more of a metal bending type technique, or do we view that as being more of a spiritual style technique? Because airbending has a spiritual technique, which is Jinora's special ability, which relates to spirit projection. So it's different than just someone spiritual being able to separate their spirit from their body and just meditate into the spirit world. Jinora specifically is able to like separate her spirit from her body and then sort of basically connect it to someone that she cares about. So it doesn't just like come out of her body like in the spirit world exactly where she is, which is typically how it works. Your spirit transfers over to that point in the physical world, but in the spirit world, she's able to like project it somewhere else in the physical world if she wants, or jump across the spirit world, which typically isn't the way it works. So it's being able to keep like an aspect of your bending while you're in your spirit form. That sort of being, I think the idea you're meant to view it is kind of like your spirit kind of flows with the wind almost. That like you're able to just like channel it across the paths of the air currents or whatever to someone whose energy that you're connected with, which she is connected with Korra, and she is connected with Kai. So that's that technique. Again, that one I think you need to be really, really spiritual to do, just because it does seem mostly spiritual, minorly airbender focused. So that's an interesting one. Anything else? Does earthbending have a spiritual technique? I wouldn't associate the Lao Ge and Kyoshi technique to live as long as they want with earthbending. Nothing about the description in the books makes it clear it's an earthbending technique at all. So I don't think that's the case. Seismic sense. Is seismic sense like spiritual in nature to the point where it's an ability that you can only learn like if you're spiritual? I don't think it's inherently spiritual. I think it's more of like that ability is sort of like, if you can learn seismic sense, you can probably learn metalbending. If you can learn seismic sense, you're a very, very skilled earthbender. It's just that sort of ability that you can get that really shows your sensory abilities with the earth. What else? I'd maybe make the connection of Toph's sort of super seismic sense next to the banyan grove tree in the swamp. She specifically mentions that she is able to, from the swamp, now that she's enlightened, able to sort of sense like exactly where her daughters are across the world. That to me seems like an earthbending sensory technique taken to its like maximum, involving a spiritual area. It doesn't seem like she's able to do what the avatars can do, where it's like touch the tree and connect the roots and stuff like that. It seems like Toph is able to do like a kind of a version of that by sort of using the fact that the roots of the tree spread out sort of across the world to roughly get a sense for where her daughters are and how they're doing. But that's maybe a stretch. That I agree. It's probably way too much of a stretch to think that that's what it actually is. And what that leaves us with is that, well, every element has like a bloodline ability that's like really, really rare, really, really powerful, except airbending. It means that pretty much all of the elements have a spiritual technique, except for maybe earth. And then similarly, like airbending also doesn't have that kind of advanced form like others do. But it's hard to fully classify everything like that, because all of a sudden you can make the case that like, well, waterbending has a bunch of different techniques as we go through, and that even going down the bloodbending path, like you have so many other techniques that sort of relate to it. Like very early in the series, Katara is able to waterbend water out of Aang's like lungs when he nearly drowns. Kinto from the trading card game is able to mess with the water in people's stomachs to make them sick, and so on. You have like those examples of those techniques, like Zahir and Afiko's ability to create a sphere of air around someone and suck the air out of their lungs. That's also sort of like, oh, like. Is that actually bending the air in their lungs, or is it just like creating a vacuum around their head that ends up just having the effect of sucking it out? I think that's more of the case there, but still, it's a powerful technique. And I think the point here is just that, like, could we potentially get to a point where you are able to get a bender who is powerful enough to not be born with the ability of, say, lavabending, but can train themselves to get more powerful to eventually learn it. And it gets into this idea of like, is bending constantly going to get more and more powerful over the generations or not? It seems to be that case. And like, is it going to get to a point where like people being born with combustion bending, with lavabending, are more and more common going forward as it becomes more and more sort of known across the world, like how these abilities work and so on? So like lightning and metal bending, which have become more prevalent, these other techniques are the same, in that if Bolin has kids, are his kids going to be born with lava bending also? Because obviously Yakon's line is like the main one that kind of gets across. You know, it's a powerful bloodbending line. Otherwise, you have stuff like, I guess, the line of Fire Lords is a powerful firebending family that the Fire Nation has obviously manipulated for a while to get as powerful as possible, both in terms of politics but also just talent of its people. So if Bolin has kids with Opal, they obviously are going to have a chance to either be an Airbender or be an Earthbender. If they're an Earthbender, will they have the potential to be a Lavabender? Maybe. It seems to be the case. Why not? And it just happens to be that typically these very powerful benders do seem to just get killed before they're able to have kids of their own, which is why we have no other combustion benders in the world now. The Yakone family bloodline has ended, but another person with that ability could pop up now that it's an option to be a thing, and so on. So yeah, I think straight away it means that in terms of special bending, the main option you have to, I think, really blow people away with a new technique would be some new airbender coming in that has like some crazy sound related ability or whatever path they want to go down with whatever the like really unique airbending technique is. I think most people agree that sound is probably the way to go, but we'll see about it. Like maybe not direct sound, but like I said, sort of sonic boom type thing, and having techniques that relate to that would be pretty powerful to have. So yeah, they're the main points to make here. Is effectively just that sort of the power in bending is both scale and just raw power as well as precision, and most of these special abilities are just sort of, they're accessible by a bender who is powerful enough to like do them basically. And it's not this inherent thing where it's like, you know, metal bending is not actually like the ability to bend metal itself. It's bending the remains of impurities in the metal. And it's the same thing as well. Bloodbending is not actually bending blood, it's still water bending just inside the person's body, and so on. You know, that there is that understanding that you have to have throughout the whole process, and realize that, yeah, the more powerful you are and the more powerful you get, the more you have the ability to do powerful stuff with small amounts of your element, which brings up the question with Avatar Yoon. With Yoon, given how powerful he was in the final fight, if he had tried, I think Yoon would have been strong enough to bend metal. Just the way his abilities are, I really think that like if he had went for it, he could have been the one to discover metal bending with just how skilled he was. But it is notable that he was spirit enhanced at this point, so it's like it still gives Toph that advantage because she did it as like a normal bender and not someone who had consumed the spirit. But still, it just speaks to that idea of, if you can make yourself powerful enough, you sort of open these abilities to you, which is, I suppose, begs the question of, like, say, Katara. If Katara consumed some sort of a spirit and made herself more powerful, could she bloodbend at any point? Or is the Yakone family and their bloodline power literally meant to be very bloodbending specific, that only they and their ability gives access to that power? Or is it just literally anyone who has their power level can do the same things that they can do? It's just that to get to their power level, you can't achieve it naturally outside of being born with it. And that's where you get into sort of the situations here. Like, I'm not saying power levels in terms of like direct numbers, but just in terms of like comparing them to like other characters very clearly. Everyone, when you do analysis on like fighting, you have to treat the bloodbending family as being like this whole other thing. You have to treat the combustion benders as being like it's a special fight when they're involved, in the same way that the avatars usually isn't the fairest fight with normal benders, and so on. So yeah, they're my thoughts on special bending techniques. I think I covered most of them. There's probably like one or two techniques I maybe forgot about, but if you have anything or questions about this, absolutely, this is one of those ones where this is to open the discussion in the comments below. Obviously, I didn't really have the answers in this one, which is why I didn't do the video in a way where I present like this is the way it works, and it was mostly speculation here. It's definitely a conversation starter of a topic rather than this is exactly how it works. But yeah, so in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on this video. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.